Look who the wind blew back. Melissa Richardson's sharp voice echoed through the lobby of St. Vincent Children's Hospital, loud enough for all the parents waiting in the waiting room to hear perfectly. The same one who said my husband was the child's father. Keisha Williams, 23, held her 4-month-old baby Marcus tighter as she felt dozens of curious eyes turn toward her. She had spent the last few months working as a nursing assistant at that very hospital, and she never imagined that a simple pediatric appointment would result in such calculated public humiliation. Everyone here can see, Melissa continued, adjusting her designer purse and gesturing dramatically, that this girl tried to blackmail my husband with this child. Dr. Richardson is a respected man in this town, and she thought she could take advantage of his kindness. Dr. James Richardson, head of the pediatric cardiology department, stood beside his wife, avoiding Keisha's gaze. The same man who 6 months ago had promised to take Marcus in and care for them both now pretended not to know her, as if those whispered promises had never existed. An older nurse whispered to her colleague beside her, "It's always the same story. These girls think they can get ahead by getting pregnant by married doctors." Keisha took a deep breath, her voice coming out calmer than anyone would have expected. "I didn't come here to bother anyone, Mrs. Melissa. I just came for Marcus's appointment. He has a minor heart condition that needs to be monitored." "Heart condition?" Melissa laughed loudly, cruelly. "How convenient. I bet that's just another excuse to hang around my husband. Sweetheart, you can fool some people, but everyone knows that girls like you always find a way to take advantage of successful men." What no one in that room could see were the little signs Keisha had learned to hide. The way she watched every movement, every word, every facial expression. The calmness that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms and developed a resilience that goes beyond their fragile appearance. While Melissa continued her show for the impromptu audience, Keisha discreetly adjusted Marcus in her arms, checking that the small recorder hidden among his diapers was still working. Every poisonous word, every public display of prejudice, every involuntary confession was being carefully documented. "I have nowhere to go with this whole situation," Keisha muttered, seemingly defeated, "but Marcus needs this medical attention." It was at that moment that a deep, authoritative voice cut through the tense silence of the lobby. "I believe I can help with that." Everyone turned to see a tall, impeccably dressed man in his 40s watching the scene with an expression that mixed curiosity and something deeper. David Kingston, one of the city's most influential businessmen and the hospital's largest donor, had witnessed the entire humiliation. There, before all the surprised and confused stares, Keisha stood firm, like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. Because she had learned a valuable lesson during those months of silence. When you have no money or last name to defend yourself, you have to be smarter than your enemies. If this story of prejudice and overcoming adversity touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a single mother would turn her apparent humiliation into the catalyst for a revolution that would completely change the lives of everyone involved. David Kingston watched the scene unfolding in the lobby closely, his experienced eyes picking up details that others missed. As a businessman who had built an empire from nothing, he recognized the signs of someone being systematically destroyed by people who confused privilege with superiority. "Mr. Kingston," Dr. Richardson finally noticed him, his tone instantly changing to deference. "We weren't expecting to see you today. I was just resolving a misunderstanding with a former employee." "Former employee?" David raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting between Keisha and the Richardsons. "Interesting. And what kind of misunderstanding involves publicly humiliating a mother with a sick baby?" Melissa immediately tried to control the damage. "Oh, Mr. Kingston, it's a delicate situation. This girl tried to blackmail my husband by claiming he's the father of this child. You understand how these people always try to take advantage of successful men." "These people," David repeated slowly, his voice carrying a coldness that made several people in the lobby turn to look at him. Keisha remained silent, watching the dynamic unfold. Over the past few months, she had learned to read people with surgical precision. David Kingston wasn't just another rich guy defending the status quo. There was something different in his eyes, an understanding that came from someone who had faced real adversity. "You know," Dr. Richardson tried to change the subject. "About the donation we discussed for the new pediatric wing? Perhaps we could talk in my office." "Actually," David interrupted, "I'd like to hear more about this child's medical case. I am the largest financial contributor to this hospital, and I am interested in ensuring that all patients receive the best care possible, regardless of who they are or where they come from." Melissa's discomfort was palpable. Mr. Kingston, I'm sure there are more important cases that deserve your attention. This is just a personal situation that involves denying medical care to a child, David finished, his voice cutting. I remain interested. It was then that Keisha finally spoke, her voice calm but laden with a strength that surprised everyone. Marcus was born with a small ventricular septal defect. It's a treatable condition, but it requires specialized care. Dr. Richardson promised to personally take care of the case, considering the special circumstances. Special circumstances, Melissa laughed bitterly. She means the blackmail she tried to pull. Actually, Keisha continued, completely ignoring Melissa, I'm referring to the fact that Dr. Richardson promised to take responsibility for Marcus when he found out I was pregnant. He said he would leave his wife and we would build a family together. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Richardson had visibly paled, while Melissa looked between her husband and Keisha with a look of growing horror. James. Melissa whispered, her voice trembling. What is she talking about? David watched the scene with renewed interest. Years of business experience had taught him to recognize when someone was lying, and Dr. Richardson was clearly panicking. Melissa, you know this woman, Dr. Richardson stammered. She's obviously making up stories to try to extort money from us. Keisha calmly adjusted Marcus in her arms and said, I have the messages, Dr. Richardson. All of them. Including the one from 3 weeks ago where you asked me to be patient because you hadn't found the right way to tell your wife everything yet. The change in Dr. Richardson's expression was instantaneous, from disdain to absolute terror. Melissa stared at him as if she were seeing a stranger. James, her voice was almost inaudible, tell me she's lying. David Kingston smiled slightly. There was something about Keisha that intrigued him, the way she remained calm under pressure, how she chose her words carefully, how she revealed information strategically. She wasn't the helpless victim the Richardsons thought they were dealing with. You know what, David said loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear, I think we should continue this conversation in a more private setting. Dr. Richardson, I'm sure you don't mind clarifying these allegations, considering your position at the hospital and our long-standing partnership. What no one but Keisha noticed was the almost imperceptible smile that crossed David Kingston's lips. He had recognized something in her that the others couldn't see, the same quiet determination he himself had cultivated during years of fighting to prove his worth in a world that tried to keep him in his place. Each new humiliation Melissa tried to inflict only strengthened something inside Keisha that her oppressors couldn't see, a silent strength fueled by the very injustice they sought to perpetuate, growing like a storm that had yet to show its true intensity. The hospital conference room had become a psychological battlefield. David Kingston watched with growing interest as Dr. Richardson desperately tried to regain control of the situation he had created. Mr. Kingston, Dr. Richardson forced a confident smile, I'm sure a man of your business understands how certain people try to take advantage of successful professionals. This young lady is clearly trying to extort our family. Interesting theory, David replied, slowly sitting down in the leather chair. And the messages she mentioned? I suppose they're part of this extortion scheme as well. Melissa stared at her husband, her expression shifting from confusion to something much more dangerous. James, answer me directly. Did you or did you not have a relationship with this woman? Melissa, you're being ridiculous, Dr. Richardson tried to laugh, but the sound came out forced and artificial. She's obviously lying. She probably doesn't even have any real messages. It was then that Keisha calmly placed Marcus in the stroller and took her phone out of her purse. Dr. Richardson, would you like me to read some of the messages here, in front of your wife and Mr. Kingston? Or would you prefer to talk in private first? The silence that followed was heavy. David Kingston crossed his arms, clearly waiting for an answer, while Melissa held her breath. You can't prove anything, Dr. Richardson said finally, his voice lower but laden with menace. And even if you have a few messages taken out of context, who do you think will believe you? A young woman with no resources against a respected doctor with a 20-year career. David raised an eyebrow. I'm still curious about those messages. Keisha looked directly at Dr. Richardson, her voice remaining disturbingly calm. March 15th, 11:43 p.m., I need more time to tell Melissa everything. I know I promised it would be after Marcus is born, but the situation is complicated. You and our son are my priority right now. The color literally drained from Dr. Richardson's face. Melissa stumbled slightly, holding on to the table. Our son, Melissa repeated slowly. You said our son to her? Go on, David said simply, clearly fascinated by the dynamic unfolding before him. March 22nd, 2:15 in the morning, Keisha continued, her eyes never leaving Dr. Richardson's face. I can't sleep thinking about you too. Melissa doesn't need to know about my decision yet. When I tell her I'm leaving her, I'll introduce you and Marcus as my new family. I promise we'll be happy together. James. Melissa screamed, her voice echoing through the room. How could you? How could you betray me like this and then make me look like a fool by humiliating this woman in public? Dr. Richardson had begun to sweat visibly. Melissa, listen, I can explain. Those messages. I was going through a difficult, confusing time. A difficult time. David interrupted, his voice cold. Doctor, you promised to leave your wife to start a family with this young woman. Then you publicly denied any involvement. And now you're suggesting it was just a momentary confusion? That's when Keisha revealed something no one expected. Actually, there's something else you need to know. Dr. Richardson wasn't just negligent with me and Marcus. He tried to convince me to have an abortion when he found out I was pregnant. He said a baby would complicate his plans. The revelation hit like a bomb. Melissa held onto the table to keep from falling, while David Kingston watched Dr. Richardson with an expression that had become dangerously serious. She's lying. Dr. Richardson exploded. This is slander. Mr. Kingston, you can't believe the words of this what? David asked slowly, rising from his chair. Finish the sentence, Doctor. Dr. Richardson's moment of hesitation was revealing. His prejudice was almost slipping out, and everyone in the room could feel it. This opportunist, he finally said, but the damage was already done. Keisha smiled for the first time since the confrontation had begun. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of someone who had just seen his opponent make a fatal mistake. Dr. Richardson, she said softly, do you remember the conversation we had about abortion? It was in your office on December 28th. You said, and I quote, it would be best for everyone involved if you got rid of the problem before people start asking questions about a mixed-race baby in the hospital. David Kingston slowly turned to Dr. Richardson, his eyes narrowing. Mixed-race baby? What an interesting word for a doctor to use. She's making this up. Dr. Richardson stammered, but his body language was screaming guilt. Actually, Keisha continued, her voice gaining strength, that particular conversation was also recorded. You see, Dr. Richardson, when you spend your life being underestimated because of your color and your background, you learn quickly to protect yourself by documenting everything. The silence in the room was deafening. Melissa stared at her husband as if she were looking at a stranger, while David Kingston processed the implications of what he had just heard. Recorded. Dr. Richardson whispered, panic finally fully evident in his voice. Keisha simply nodded, her hand resting on the purse where, everyone now knew, was stored enough evidence to destroy not only Dr. Richardson's marriage, but potentially his entire career. David Kingston had recognized something in Keisha from the first moment he had met her, the same calm, strategic determination he himself had cultivated over years of building his empire. She wasn't a victim begging for charity, she was a strategist executing a plan. You know what, David said finally, turning to Keisha, I think you and I need to talk. About Marcus's future, about your legal options, and about making sure justice is done properly. For a moment, when Dr. Richardson realized he had completely underestimated the woman he had tried to dismiss as just another opportunist, something fundamental shifted in the room's dynamic. Anyone watching closely would have noticed that it wasn't desperation that now shone in Keisha's eyes, it was the contained power of someone who was about to rewrite not only her own story, but that of everyone else in the room. The revelation about the recording completely transformed the dynamics of the room. Dr. Richardson had gone from confident predator to hunted prey in a matter of seconds, and David Kingston watched this transformation with the interest of someone who recognizes a brilliantly executed strategy. Keisha, David said calmly, before we proceed, there is something I need to disclose. My interest in this situation is not purely philanthropic. He paused, his eyes fixed on Dr. Richardson. 3 months ago, I received an anonymous tip about discriminatory practices at this hospital. Someone was systematically documenting how Black and Latino patients were receiving inferior treatment, especially when they couldn't pay for private care. The panic in Dr. Richardson's eyes intensified visibly. Mr. Kingston, I can explain any misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. David opened his own briefcase, revealing a thick stack of documents. We have records of at least 15 cases in the last 2 years. Patients who were neglected, diagnoses deliberately delayed, treatment denied. And you, doctor, appear in 90% of those cases. Keisha smiled slightly. She had found the perfect ally without even looking for him. But back to our conversation about mixed-race babies, David continued coldly. This recording Keisha mentioned would be extremely valuable to the investigation I'm conducting. It was then that Keisha decided to reveal the full extent of her preparation. Actually, Mr. Kingston, it's not just one recording. It's 17 recordings over 6 months. Every conversation I had with Dr. Richardson, every broken promise, every prejudiced comment, every attempt to convince me to abort Marcus. Melissa, who had remained silent, processing her husband's betrayal, finally exploded. 17 recordings? James, you had a relationship with her for 6 months and made a fool of me. It wasn't a relationship. Dr. Richardson shouted desperately. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. A mistake that lasted 6 months? Keisha asked calmly, taking a small digital recorder out of her purse. Do you want to hear the recording from April 12th, when you said you loved me and that Melissa was just an obstacle to our happiness? Or would you prefer the one from May 22nd, when you said you wanted Marcus to be raised away from inappropriate influences, referring to my family? The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Dr. Richardson's heavy breathing. David Kingston stood up, his presence completely dominating the room. Dr. Richardson, as the principal financier of this hospital and a member of the Board of Trustees, I am formally initiating an investigation into your medical practices and professional conduct. These recordings will be part of the evidence. You can't do that, Dr. Richardson whispered, his face now completely white. My career, my reputation. Your reputation? Melissa laughed bitterly. James, you just lost a lot more than your reputation. You lost your wife, your family, your integrity. And apparently, if Mr. Kingston is right, you lost your career as well. Keisha calmly put away the tape recorder and picked Marcus up from the stroller. Dr. Richardson, there's one last thing you need to know. Remember when you said no one would believe the word of a young woman with no resources against a respected doctor? She paused, her eyes meeting his. I'm not just a young woman with no resources. I have a degree in investigative journalism from State University, with a specialization in documenting cases of medical discrimination. I've spent the last 6 months not only recording our conversations, but also systematically documenting every case of prejudice I've witnessed in this hospital. The revelation hit him like a ton of bricks. Dr. Richardson stumbled, grabbing the table for support. You deliberately misled me, he stammered. I protected myself, Keisha corrected. When I realized you were trying to manipulate me into aborting Marcus based on racial prejudice, I decided it was my responsibility to expose not only you, but the entire system that allows doctors like you to discriminate against patients based on the color of their skin. David Kingston watched with growing admiration. So the anonymous reports were hers. Some were mine. Others were from colleagues who finally found the courage to speak up after I began documenting concrete evidence. Melissa looked between her husband and Keisha with an expression of utter horror. James, you didn't just betray me. You're a racist. A racist doctor who discriminates against patients. I'm not a racist. Dr. Richardson exploded. Things are complicated. Complicated how? Keisha asked, her voice cutting. Like when you said it would be problematic to explain to your fellow doctors why you were leaving your wife for a girl from the suburbs. Or when you suggested that Marcus would be better off raised away from inappropriate cultural influences. David Kingston was clearly impressed by how meticulously Keisha had documented everything. How much evidence did you collect in total? In addition to the 17 recordings of personal conversations with Dr. Richardson, I have 53 recordings of discriminatory interactions with patients, 28 internal emails demonstrating systemic bias, and 42 photographs of Black and Latino patients being directed to lower quality wards while white patients with similar conditions received priority treatment. The amount of evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Richardson sat slumped over, his head in his hands. My career is over, he muttered. Your career as a discriminatory doctor is over, Keisha corrected. Maybe now you'll have the opportunity to learn how to be a decent human being. David Kingston smiled for the first time since the confrontation had begun. Keisha, I have a proposal for you. I'm creating an ethics oversight department at every hospital I fund. I need someone with your investigative skills and your passion for justice to lead this initiative. The salary would be 3 times what you were making as a nurse's aide. Melissa had begun to cry silently, finally understanding the full extent of her husband's betrayal and prejudice. James, she said through her tears, I want a divorce. And I want you out of the house today. Dr. Richardson raised his head, his eyes red. Melissa, please, we can talk. No, she said firmly. Not after finding out who you really are. Keisha adjusted Marcus in her arms and looked directly at Dr. Richardson one last time. You know what's ironic? If you had simply come forward about Marcus from the beginning, treated our situation with honesty and respect, none of this would have happened. But your prejudice, your arrogance, and your cowardice destroyed not only my trust, but your own life. As the revelations piled up and the masks finally fell away, there remained a sense that justice had been served in a way that transcended personal revenge. It was the kind of victory that rewrites the rules of the game for everyone who comes after, proving that true strength isn't in accepting injustice, but in turning it into fuel for change that goes far beyond the pain itself. 18 months later, Keisha Williams walked through the halls of the same St. Vincent Children's Hospital, but this time with a sign on her door that read, Dr. Keisha Williams, Director of Ethical Oversight and Medical Justice. Her office was strategically located on the administrative floor, overlooking the lobby where it had all begun. Marcus, now almost 2, played quietly in his portable crib while Keisha reviewed the latest reports. In just a year and a half, the ethics oversight program she had developed had been implemented in 15 hospitals in the Kingston network, resulting in an 83% reduction in reports of racial discrimination. Mommy works, Marcus babbled, pointing to the papers scattered across the desk, a phrase he had learned to associate with the pride in her voice every time Keisha explained to him what she did. The phone rang. It was David Kingston, who had become not only her professional mentor but a genuine father figure in her life. Keisha, I just got the confirmation. The program is being expanded nationwide. 28 hospitals will adopt the Williams Protocol for ethical oversight within the next 6 months. Williams Protocol. The name they had chosen was an honor that still moved her. His work was literally saving lives and ensuring that no child would be denied medical care because of the color of their skin. And Dr. Richardson? Keisha asked, though she already knew the answer. He lost his medical license for good last week. The state medical board used her recordings as the main evidence. Melissa finalized her divorce and donated her entire family fortune to organizations fighting racism in medicine. Keisha smiled slightly. Melissa had become an unexpectedly fierce advocate for the cause, using her personal experience to educate other doctors' wives about signs of prejudice they had ignored for years. That afternoon, while organizing the files for the most recent cases, Keisha came across a folder that made her pause. It was the original report of the discrimination she had documented 18 months ago, including photos from the day she was publicly humiliated in the lobby. Marcus had grown into a healthy, bright child, his heart condition completely under control thanks to the first-rate medical care David Kingston had secured. More importantly, he was growing up in a world where his mother had literally rewritten the rules about how children like him would be treated in hospitals. You know, Marcus, Keisha said, lifting her son and walking over to the window overlooking the lobby, Mommy learned something very important down here. Sometimes when people try to make us feel small, it's because they're afraid of our true potential. From her office, she could see a young Latina mother being treated with respect and dignity by the same nurse who 18 months ago had whispered prejudiced comments. The mandatory training protocol had worked. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Carmen, David's assistant, who had become a surrogate aunt to Marcus and a close friend to Keisha. Another impact report is in, Carmen announced proudly. The Detroit hospital reported that after implementing the Williams Protocol, minority patient satisfaction increased by 92%, and the average wait time for appointments became equal for all ethnic groups. Numbers. Hard data. Real lives being transformed because a young mother refused to accept that injustice was inevitable. That night, as she tucked Marcus into bed in her spacious apartment, a gift from David that she had initially refused but eventually accepted when she understood it was an investment in the future she was building, Keisha reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her there. Dr. Richardson now worked as an attendant at a rehabilitation clinic, in a role that allowed him to help people but without the authority to discriminate against anyone. Melissa had become one of the largest funders of medical diversity programs in the country. And David Kingston? He had found a new purpose, using his fortune to ensure that stories like Keisha's became catalysts for change rather than just tragic statistics. You know what's most ironic about this whole story, Marcus? Keisha whispered as the baby fell asleep. If Dr. Richardson had simply treated me with respect from the beginning, he would still be a respected doctor married to a wealthy woman. But his prejudice not only destroyed his own life, it created the force that transformed the entire system. As she watched her son sleep peacefully, Keisha smiled, thinking of how many other children would now have access to the same quality medical care Marcus received. True revenge had not been destroying Dr. Richardson, but building something greater than he could ever have imagined. A year and a half ago, she was just a young mother being publicly humiliated by people who confused privilege with superiority. Today, she was the architect of a system that ensured medical dignity for thousands of families like hers. The best revenge, she had learned, is not to repay the harm done to you. It is achieving such great success that the original injustice becomes fuel for change that benefits not only you, but future generations who will never have to face the same battles. If this story of transformation and overcoming adversity touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that sometimes justice needs a little help from us to find its way.